Thank you so much for coming. Some of you know that I just flew in actually from London, where I was at another conference where I also talked. And I'm very happy and very thankful that I can be here as well and talk to you about what I think is important. Now, some of you I know, may not know me personally, but know who I am because I'm sending out a newsletter that some of you are receiving, I'm sure, and others, have heard about me. And you know that I'm really interested in translation technology. That is sort of, that's one of my main interests. That's what I feel really passionate about. I feel passionate about other things also. Just ask my wife. I feel passionate about a lot of things, and we actually are going to talk about technology today, but we will come to a place that you might not expect actually in this talk here. And in fact, if you look at the title of the presentation, you will see a different title than you find in your program. I've just in the last couple of days changed it to this presentation because I hope that what I have to say is relevant to you and is meaningful to you, but we'll see. So what I would, you know a little bit about me. I'm a translator. I live in the United States. I'm an English to German translator. Originally come from Germany, and I'm interested and write a lot about technology, and I know a lot about translation technology. And in fact, tomorrow we're going to have a workshop, some of you and I, about translation technology. But what I would like to know before we start is who you are. I'm sure that question has been asked in other sessions, but I wasn't here, so So can you show me by just a show of hands who is a freelance translator? And who owns an LSP or a single language vendor? Okay, so the majority are freelance translators. And do we have interpreters also? I have this great theory, and this is a little, not really to the topic here, but I have this fantastic theory that I don't know any Russian, really. The only term that I know is paravat. Shoot! Well, I know Mirazhnaya, but that's something else. Paravatchik, right? Paravatchik, that's translator, right? But it's also interpreter, isn't it? And I have this great theory that when I was here 3 years, I was in Ekaterinburg 3 years ago for the translation forum, and almost every person who was a translator that I talked to was also an interpreter, or vice versa. And my great theory is that because there is only one word in Russian, you become both when you become one, right? So you're both a translator and interpreter. Anyway, this is not, I really have that theory. Huh? It's exactly. So I titled this talk, "The End of the World for Translation as We Knew It." And some of you might actually know where it comes from. It comes from an article that was published beginning of January by the CEO of a kind of a mid-sized American language service provider, also a technology provider called Lingotech. And it doesn't really matter what he said in this article. It wasn't that great what he said actually. And you can see that there were quite a few tweets here, so it was fairly heavily discussed and was actually more criticized than discussed what he said. But I think that it seemed appropriate to me to title this talk like that because I think that what we are doing right now, and that's actually sort of the main thrust of my talk today, we are talking ourselves up in a way that is completely unrealistic. We are having these great theories, and we're having these big things that we're throwing out about ourselves, about the translation industry, that do not match reality sometimes. And what I would like to do in this talk is to actually look at what's for real and who we are and what we are doing. Some of you know that I wrote a book recently. A colleague of mine, Nataly Kelly, and I wrote this book here, Found in Translation, and it's actually a lovely book. And I think many of you would enjoy to read it. Well, thank you. And the idea of the book was, it's a book of stories of what we collected. We interviewed hundreds of translators and interpreters around the world, literally around the world. In fact, there was one week, my favorite week of the whole process of writing this book was when on Monday I talked to an Inuktitut translator in the very north of Canada, an Eskimo, right? Who her, yeah. I talked to her. Oh. And then I talked to very next day I talked to Maori translator, who is obviously living in New Zealand. So the people that we talked to literally spanned the whole world, and the idea of the book was just to collect stories that give, translators typically are sort of faceless. That's sort of our job, to be faceless. Whether we are translator and interpreter, the ladies in the booth back there work really hard to interpret what I'm saying here, but you don't know who they are, and you probably will not know who they are unless you know them anyway. You might know them, but in general, translators and interpreters are faceless. And what we try to do with that book is to give a face to translators and interpreters, and to make people understand what translators and interpreters do, and how much they have an impact on virtually everything in the world. And when I read something like this, like the article that this guy from Linguitec wrote, that the world of translation as we knew it is going to come to an end, is going to completely change in 2013, it reminded me of some of the stories that we collected for the book. And it reminded me that of the fact that translation is in the way that we've known it for a long time is still really powerful and still very much alive. This is one of those stories here, for instance. Remember when the earthquake in Haiti hit Haiti, right? It destroyed much of Port-au-Prince, the capital of Haiti, and many people were killed, and many people were injured. So thousands of rescue workers came to Haiti to help those folks who were in need. They came from Brazil, from America, from Europe, and they, I think, sort of assumed that people in Haiti must speak French or something. It's going to be easy to communicate with them. Well, that wasn't the case. People in Haiti don't speak French. They speak Haitian Creole, which is, a very distinct language from French, obviously. So what happened was you had these thousands of rescue workers in Haiti, literally thousands of rescue workers in Haiti who couldn't talk to their patients, and there was no interpreter, and there was no internet, there was no telephone, there was nothing, there was no communication line open except one. SMS or texting was still open. That was the only way that Haiti was still able to communicate with the outside world. So a guy at Stanford University called Robert Monroe had the idea of, well, why don't we set up one number? The number actually was 4636. The whole project was called Mission 4636 after this number. Why don't we set out this number so that doctors and nurses who work on people in Haiti and try to help them and can't talk to them can actually text their requests to that number? And I, in America and elsewhere, set up a network of expatriates, of folks who, of Haitian people who live elsewhere, and I text them the Creole text that needs to be translated. They text it back to me, and I text it back to Haiti. Now, it doesn't sound all that ingenious, but what happened was that hundreds of lives were saved by that, because it was the only way to communicate in some way or the other with those folks in Haiti. And as a product of that, lots and lots of lives were saved. Or this story is actually one of my very favorite stories. What you may not know is that your lives, and the lives of your families and the lives of your friends, etc., are potentially saved every day by an organization in Canada called GFIN. When in 1997 the bird flu hit Hong Kong, all remember that, right? That's when the first time that the bird flu came up, and it hit Hong Kong, which was really good because Hong Kong is very developed, is very advanced in its response. So what Hong Kong did is, or the government in Hong Kong, it killed all poultry, it killed all birds in Hong Kong, all of them, and was able to arrest the spread of the disease, because there was no bird left anymore, essentially. But two Canadian scientists were in Hong Kong at the time and looked at that and went like, so what would have happened if this would have not happened in Hong Kong, but somewhere in the Chinese hinterland, somewhere in the Chinese provinces, or in the Mexican provinces, or elsewhere where obviously the response wouldn't have been quite so swift and wouldn't have been quite so fast. So what they did is they set up a network they called it GFIN, where news articles or news items from all over the world, 4,000 a day, approximately 4,000 a day, are being machine translated into 8 languages. And you see those 7 languages, I think. French, Italian, English, Persian, Chinese, Portuguese, Russian, and Spanish. So each of these articles that comes through, and those articles are articles not from the, Beijing Herald or from the, Mexico City newspaper. Those are articles from tiny little village, publications, that would not even have been seen by the national governments, things that would have slipped through the cracks otherwise. Those are being translated, and rather than trusting the machine translation really is only there to flag certain words. And if those words are being found, if several of those words are being found in one article, it's being given to a human translator who then looks at it and sees what's for real. So this year, this is an actual example. This article came out in 2003 in the Tampa Tribune, a newspaper in America, and it was the title was Yellow Fever. And then it says, an epidemic of penalties has thwarted many drives, resulting in a 3-game losing streak and essentially leaving the Bucks season on life support. And of course the system sees that, right? The machine translation sees that and goes like, meh, 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 because you have yellow fever, you have epidemic, and you have life support. So the system sees it and sees this something is happening in Tampa and something that we need to do something. There's an epidemic outbreak of unknown proportion. And only when the human translator then sees it and goes like, this is about football, has nothing to do with Tampa Bay Buccaneers, exactly. So it has nothing to do with any potential disease or outbreak that would be dangerous. So it's a very clever use of technology and the human translator. So what I would like to do for a little bit, and we'll see how that will help us. Let's look at, at this conference and as many, at all the conferences, there's a lot of talk about translation technology all the time, right? I mean, that's what we talk about all the time. What I would like to do is sort of look back a little bit and, have those kinds of examples in mind where you have a really clever way of integrating human translation and technology and see what a history with translation technology is. The history really starts in the beginning of the 1950s. In the beginning of the 1950s, IBM, famous IBM, the big computer maker, right, had a room full of had a room like this full of computers, and it was of course the height of the beginning of the Cold War, so they were really interested in translating Russian into English because they wanted to process all that Russian information that came out of Russia that it needed to be able to read. So they translated 18 sentences. That's it, 18 sentences from Russian into English with that huge computer system. And they went like, we got it! We got it. We have machine translation almost to the point where we can machine translate everything. In fact, the guy who runs it then says, he says it's not quite yet possible to insert a Russian book at one end and come out with an English book on the other. But in maybe 5 or maybe 3 years from now, interlingual meaning conversion by electronic process is an important functional areas of several languages may well be an accomplished fact. So meaning that he says in 5 years from now, machine translation is going to be so good. And it's going to be, it's going to be the end of the translator essentially, an end of human translation because everything is going to be done by machine translation. And what he talks about the well accomplished fact, and I think the only fact that he accomplished was the FiveYear Rule. The FiveYear Rule says in 5 years from now it's going to be really good. And then after 5 years it said, well, in 5 years from now it's going to be really good, and and so on and so forth. And that was, that's kind of this spiral happened that started in the 1950s where machine translation really was sort of the future of the profession of translators. And that at least went until 1966. In 1966, the American government put together a committee called the DL Peck Committee, the Automatic Language Processing Advisory Committee, because the US government got really sick about that 5-year rule. They noticed that, you know, this 5-year rule was like a never-ending thing and nothing happened. The progress that was promised in the early 1950s just didn't happen. And so what this committee came out with was a very strong ruling about saying machine translation is not going to work. It's just not going to work. We're not going to invest any money into machine translation anymore. Instead, what we recommend to do is investing money into tools that help the translator to be more effective. So dictionary tools and terminology tools and stuff like that. Machine translation was essentially at that point in the mid-60s, at least from the US government's perspective, cancelled. There was no machine translation anymore, as far as they were concerned, as far as what they wanted to sponsor anyway. And it's kind of interesting, you know, now we are talking about machine translation so much again. And what do you think was the response of the translation industry at that point? Yeah, there was no translation industry, right? I mean, there really was no translation industry. So we didn't, at that point, we didn't have a voice. We didn't have an ability to even, you know, there was no association, and really there were no companies. There were lots of translators, and some of them were little mom and pop shops that, you know, that gave out translations to others to help them do their work. But really there was no infrastructure like we have now with the translation industry. And then in the 1980s and 1990s, something happened where text got finally, with the, you know, things that were before then were faxed or were, you know, hand delivered or sent by postal mail or by whatever, became files, became digitized, right? They became, you know, from then on out, we didn't translate on paper anymore, but we translated with we started to translate with a computer. So the thing that we started to be able to do was we started to be able to do quality assurance, which at that point was just spell checking essentially, but at least we were able to do that. We also were able to do terminology management, so we were able to have tools that allowed us, just like the American committee had asked for, tools that allowed us to build up databases that contained the terminology that we wanted to use for our projects, and we were able to have translation memories. And you all know what a translation memory is, of course. And those, you know, all these features together then became what I like to call translation environment tools, TENS. You know, typically many people also say CAT tools. I don't particularly like that tool, and we can talk about it tomorrow why I don't like that tool, that term. I prefer the word TENT. But so those are tools like Trados and Star Transit, Deja Vu, WordFast, you know, those kinds of tools. But so what was really important, I think, at that point, and something that we need to understand as far as how we respond to new technology today is we need to look at the way that we responded as translation professionals. LSPs who have just at that point started to you know, there was no LSPs in the 1970s or early 1980s. Only when the technology came about, the LSPs, language service providers, that, you know, farm out work to freelance translators, actually were formed. So the LSPs that were just being started were very enthusiastic about this technology. Of course they were very enthusiastic because it was, for them it was a possibility to save a lot of money, to work more efficiently, and to you know, essentially have a competitive advantage to folks who have not used this technology. The freelance translators, they responded very slowly. They didn't like that very much, this technology. And what happened, I think, at this point is that, you know, would the response have been different? If the response by the translators would have been different at that point, the tools would have developed in a very different manner. So I think that, for instance, the way that the tools, even up to the present day, process certain things like terminology, for instance, is not really geared towards the freelance translator, because we have, you know, way back then, 25 or 30 years ago, we didn't embrace those tools. So these tools took a different track, took a sort of development that did not match what we needed, because we were not buying it, we were not supporting it, we didn't put our money essentially where the development should have gone. And what happened between the LSPs and the freelance translators is that, you know, a division sort of for the first time appeared. That, you know, there was new pricing models. There was the, you know, fuzzy matching and perfect matches were priced differently, and many freelance translators were very frustrated about that. And so the first time it kind of a division between the LSPs and the freelance translators appeared. And you know, machine translation, even though it wasn't funded anymore by the government, was of course still being developed. There were some private companies like Sistran, a French company that provided the translation for the Babelfish online you know, machine translation program. Companies like that still develop their product, and it's kind of interesting how we, as the translation industry or as translation professionals responded to machine translation. At that time, we loved stories like this here. The stories, and you probably all have heard that, that's the story of, you know, this is a, you know, Bible verse here, the spirit is willing but the body is weak. Translated into Russian and then translated back into English comes out, the vodka is strong but the meat is rotten. Of course, you know, this was never true. This never happened. This, you know, it's one of those urban myths that you know, machine translation was never quite smart enough to have, you know, clever things like that, I think. But we loved those stories, and when we talked about machine translation among each other, those were the stories that we told each other, and said, you know, this is how stupid machine translation is. When in reality, those things didn't necessarily happen, but you know, it made for good stories. In the early, we're almost done with a little history lesson here, but I think hopefully you'll see what this is good for in the long run. So in the early 2000s, something happened. You know, the internet had happened, but suddenly content just exploded on the internet. Right? There was so much content that needed to be translated. Oh, this is the reminder that half an hour is over. So the amount of content that needed to be translated was not just doubling or tripling or quadrupling, was exploding in the early 2000s. Plus, what happened was that social networks started to come about, right? The Facebook started and other social networks started, and the web became more and more multilingual, meaning that people had to communicate on the web. And that really made machine translation suddenly, there was a new reason for machine translation to come into play, because machine translation, the gisting of machine translation, the approximate meaning of what needed to be translated on the web, you know, that machine translation needed to fill that void essentially. Plus, a new kind of machine translation technology came. Up to that point, the kind of machine translation that we had was a machine translation that was based on rules. That means that there were rules for the source language, there were rules for the target language, and by the computer knowing these rules, it was able to translate from one language to another. Because rules are very complex and rules have many exceptions, and because the computer was only able to process so many rules, the quality of these machine translations was not particularly good. So a new technology came about where already translated content was read into computers, and had the computers essentially process that content to create sort of like a little child learns, right? It was able to learn a language by looking at large amounts of content. That's called statistical machine translation, right? It's the stuff that you and I have translated over the many years. That stuff that you know, many of you have translated between English and Russian, and I between English and German. That was all taken by things like Google or by Microsoft Translator and made into machine translation engines. And just like that, machine translation took over, and really that's kind of the end of our story here. That's not quite true, of course. You know, that's not what happened, of course. Machine translation did become very important, but of course it didn't take over. What's very interesting to me, just this weekend there are a number of conferences. There's a conference in England of the British translators. There's a conference in America of the Association of Language Companies, and it's very interesting to follow the different Twitter streams of these conferences, because emphasis that these different conferences have is quite different. The conference in America of the language companies is very much about, quality does not matter. Quality, kind of what Renato likes to say. Yes. Get it closer. Okay. That all that matters is, you need to be able to sell your product. You need to be able to differentiate yourself in other areas. This tweet came about 4 or 5 days ago. It's quoting Keith Lasker, who is the CEO of SDL Technologies, and he says, the machine translation quality debate is dead. Over 75% of our language markets, so the language markets that SDL Charter serves, report the use of some form of MT solution. Now, the second part of the statement might be right, but the machine translation quality debate is dead. Is one of those things we like to talk in really big terms these days. I think we like to be very, we like to be a little provocative in how we say things and what we say when it comes to technology, and I think that sometimes those statements don't help us very much. What I would like to see is, as we talk about MT, it doesn't make sense for us to talk about it not knowing how we actually are using MT. So if I would ask you who of you, and I think this is probably more geared towards the freelancers in this room here, who among you is regularly using machine translation on projects? So who is essentially who is mostly post-editing? Who is primarily post-editing versus, translating from scratch? You want to raise your hands, those who do that? Just one. Who is regularly using MT as a productivity tool? So who is using MT as an additional tool to the translation that you're doing? So 10, maybe 15 or something. And who has tried to use MT as a productivity tool? Has looked at whether it would help you with your translation? That's pretty much, I think, almost everyone. It would be silly not to have tried that. I recently did an article in an American magazine. The reason why I wrote this article, because I wanted to have my picture with this beautiful, Danish lady here, of course, blue eyes and everything. But it was a really interesting article. In fact, it was a discussion essentially between Charlotte, who's a Danish translator, and myself, and it was about how we are using or should be using machine translation in our work as translators. And we had very different positions. She was very euphoric about machine translation, and I was a little bit more cautious in describing how I use machine translation, or don't actually use machine translation so much in my process. But what was most interesting about it, I think, was that we figured out that when we talk about machine translation, we really can't talk about machine translation in kind of in an empty context. This is a study that the European Union has recently made, where it looked at machine translation and the usefulness of machine translation by language combination, and it found that some language combinations really. Some translators of certain languages combinations really like to use machine translation and benefit from it greatly. So this first slide here is you have the users who use machine translation 25% of the time or less versus the users who use it 50% or more. And you see that the German, for instance, is a language, because of the different sentence structure, that is not very well suited to be translated from English by a machine. Germans don't like to use it at all. Latvians don't really like to use it very much either. Whereas the Bulgarians, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Romanian, especially the Swedish translators. Swedish is kind of the language that is always the one that the machine translation developers like to point out is such a good combination between English and Swedish. The results happen to be really good because the structure of the language is so similar. But you can see here that there's a huge difference in between hardly using it at all and between using it almost all the time. just depending on the language combination, not because of, you know, being technology, not liking technology or something like that. Or here you can see they were asked to do a quality evaluation of the machine translation according to language combination again, and you can see here that there's a, you know, that where, you know, some of the languages respond that there's, you know, they almost always are like translation memory matches that just need to be edited a little bit. You have most of the Romanian languages here, the Romance languages here, and the Scandinavian languages here, whereas here you have, you know, Estonian, Finnish, Latvian, and German, where it's essentially not useful at all. And I think that's important for us to remember when we talk about technologies in translation. We cannot talk about technology in translation without actually talking about what we're talking about, the very languages that we're translating. Here are some facts about machine translation that we need to embrace, I think. So machine translation is going to grow, no doubt about it. Machine translation is you know, here to stay, and in some projects it will continue to be important and will grow in those projects. It's also much easier today to build your own machine translation engine. Just in the next couple of weeks, there's going to be, in 1st of June, there's going to be a new company who will have, you know, the ability to build a machine translation engine essentially overnight. So you bring your translation memories, and it builds a machine translation just from looking at your translation memories. It's also, if you are an LSP, if you are language service providers, you would be very smart, I think, to offer machine translation as part of your service portfolio. Whether you actually want to sell it or not is a whole different question. Whether you really are interested in selling it and believing that you produce something valuable, you might not believe that, but it's important for you, I think, to be able to offer that as part of the services that you offer. But what's important, I think, as a freelancer is that we don't need to subscribe to an ideology when it comes to machine translation. We don't need to say, you know, I'm all pro or I'm all contra, and I'm so upset about what you know, what other companies do, and it's you know, I want to spend my time fighting against the people who use machine translation because it's not going to be good for anyone. I think what machine translation has done, machine translation has in fact taken over, but not in the sense that we usually think of. I think machine translation has taken over in making apparent how fragmented our industry is. You know, I was thinking, I like to use little props, little things that demonstrate what I'm trying to say. And I was thinking of what I can do to show what I think the language industry is like. The language industry, I think, is sort of like a fan. Like, let's see, up from this side here. So, you know, there's this pin that holds the fan together in the middle down here, right? That's the language. That's the one part that connects us. But the rest of it is really far, is spread apart very far. You know, and this might be Lionbridge here or something, and here might be whatever, Moravia, or here might be, you know, another large language service provider, or a machine translation provider. And we might be on the very other side of this fan here. And really, we have nothing to do with each other. And I think the concept that we are one language industry that really works on one thing and that does the same thing is complete nonsense. And in fact, the term language industry or translation industry, I think, is really problematic, because when you are a freelance translator, well, you might work for, you know, the large service provider sometimes, or you might not. You might choose not to do that. But there is no, what you do has very little to do what Lionbridge or what you know, any of the larger service providers tries to sell to their clients. And I think that's important for us to remember when we I see these discussions on Twitter or on Facebook or on, you know, LinkedIn and about things like machine translation, or about things like crowdsourcing, or about things like, you know, how we do business. And these discussions are so passionately you know, done, and people are feel so so strongly about one way or the other, and it's good to feel strongly about one way or the other, but we need to remember, you know, how that really relates to us, and often it relates to us very little, I think, what somebody else does who does a completely different business. Just because a company is also selling language in some way or the other, it might have nothing to do with the way that we sell language, or that we you know, approach our professions. I think what we need to understand is that, you know, there's many facets of the industry, and we need to find out what the facet, what the you know, if you come back, oops. If you come back to my fan here, where on the fan you're located, if you will. And then once you find out where you're located, then you got to embrace these qualities, right? And then you got to look at what kind of possibilities you have coming from these qualities. See, what we are doing as translators is we are touching so many other things, right? We have expertise and knowledge in areas that you know, the breadth of the areas that we have expertise and knowledge in is unparalleled, essentially. You know, we are entrepreneurs, right? Even every freelance translator in here is an entrepreneur. Of course, every LSP in here is an entrepreneur also, but we all have businesses, right? So that's a real skill. We are business people, and that's a skill that we need to harness. We also have the skill of being linguists. That's also a skill that we need to harvest. But if you think about what we do when we work for companies, why we can, for instance, also go in and teach communication, or teach technical writing, or teach things like, you know, there's so many things that we know a lot about because we are translators, and that we, I think, don't utilize enough in the way we sell our products. What's important, I think, is to understand that as translators we have an enormous influence. Here's one example of an enormous influence that I really like. Do you guys know what language that is here? Looks cool, doesn't it? I think it looks awesome. It's, yeah, I'm going to tell you in a second what language it is. This is the writing system is. This is not an alphabet. It's an abugida. That means that each of these characters represents a syllable, right? And the way that these, and you can see that some of these characters are, you know, so this triangle here is going like this, and this triangle is turned over, and depending on whether it's turned over or not, the vowel changes. So this, you know, this might be P and this may be Pa, just because well, this is not P and Pa. This word actually is called, this word is pronounced Iqaqiivik, and it's a word from Inuktitut. Inuktitut is the language of the Inuit that I already mentioned, the, you know, Eskimos who live in northern Canada. and the reason why I'm showing you this is you know, quite mind-blowing, I think. What this word means is internet in Inuktitut. And you know, when the modern world came when the modern world comes to you know, Aboriginal cultures like the Inuit, they have to find new words for those new things, right? I mean, you know, they have to decide whether they use something that they, you know, whether they just copy, whether they just you know, use the English term or whatever language it might come from, or whether they use a term that already exists in their culture and their language. What this term originally means, before it became internet, it means that what Iqaqiivik was when the shaman, you know, the shamans, the religious leaders, when the shamans traveled through the different kind of layers that they had to travel through to reach the dead. That's what Iqaqiivik meant. And the person who came up with that, who decided that Iqaqiivik, which used to mean that, now was supposed to mean it, was supposed to mean internet, became so important, became so relevant in having made that decision that she became the premier of Nunavut, which is the province that these folks live in. And what I think is the magic of this term, by the way, is, and that's not really important, but I think it's really interesting. So now you have heard Now, you will probably never ever meet an Inuit person. You will most likely never ever hear a word in that language. But you've just now heard that in Inuktitut, Ikiakivik is internet, and it means originally that it's traveling through all these different layers that a shaman has to travel through to reach the dead. And because you've just heard that, your idea of internet has changed. Next time you think of internet, it will have changed just a little bit. I mean, you know, it's not going to be completely different, but it will have changed, just by having heard that. And that's the power of translation. That's the power of translation. That we really are changing the, yeah, go ahead. Oh, not Mike, okay. They can't hear me, sorry. That we really are changing perception by finding new words. What we do is not only, by creating new words, we actually create new worlds. This guy here, that's also a lovely story. This guy doesn't look particularly attractive. He looks a little bit like a Neanderthal. But he was actually a great man. His name was Michael Henry Hime. Does any of you know who he is? Barry, you should know who he is. Barry. He was the most well-known literary translator from many Eastern and Western European languages into US English. So he translated books from Günter Grass from German into English. He translated books from Milan Kundera, the Czech writer, into English. It doesn't matter that you don't know him. But what's interesting about him is this. He was particularly well known as a Czech into English translator. And when Czechoslovakia was about to fall apart, was about to be separated into Slovakia and the other part, the folks who wanted to run that other part didn't know how to call the country. They had no name for the country. What do you call that other part? Czech something or the other? They didn't know how to call it. But they knew that this guy knew so much about language and had such a power over creating words because he had translated all these great novels. He had created so much language in the process that the folks, the government of what we now, of course, know as the Czech Republic, called up Michael and said, "Mike, what are we going to call a country?" And he said, let's do Czech Republic. And that's true. And they call themselves Czech Republic. Translators are so powerful. Of course that's a unique story, right? That story is not going to happen ever again. But translators have, especially if you talk to folks in smaller languages, they have great appreciation of what translators do. And I think that's something that that we cannot forget. No matter how much we talk about business of translation, no matter how much we talk about technology, about machine translation, about crowdsourcing, about all these things that are really important, what's much more important, I think, is what we think of ourselves and how we represent ourselves to the outside world. And if you remember the first slide of this, or the title of this presentation was "The End of the World of the Translation as we knew it," and he was referring to everything is going to change. What I would like to change his little wish into is that we would go out and make the world of translation as the outside world knew it. Make that end and present ourselves in a new and better way. Go out and say that we are folks that actually make the world work the way that the world works right now. The world would not be in the same manner if it wouldn't be for translators. The world would not talk to each other if it wouldn't be for translators. And we are hiding this. We are not going out to the public and telling them about it. And that's what I wish we would do. Let's make wise decisions on how we work and how we do business and do all this. But much more importantly, let's represent ourselves to the outside world in a way that is adequate to what we do, that we really have a huge impact on everything around us. It's all enabled in some way or the other by our work as translators and interpreters. So let's make sure that the world knows about that. So, thank you.
We have approximately 5 minutes for questions, if any.
You don't have the earphone for simultaneous interpreting, no? Okay, so I'll ask in English. When you ask the guys in this room to raise their hands, those who use machine translation every day, just one hand, yes? Then yesterday I think we had a presentation that machine translation for Slavic languages with flexions is a tricky thing, because the distance is much greater than with analytical languages. Exactly. You have to work more, and the discount is the same.
Exactly. And
so, do you think that this will change? I mean, there will be more hands next year for the same question? What do you think?
Truthfully, I mean, I think there will be more hands just because there's going to be more pressure by large LSPs to use machine translation. That's why there will be more hands. But I think as far as the quality goes, I think so. One probably the most exciting interview we did in writing the book is we met with Franz Och, who is the head at Google for all the machine translation efforts, and he's a really smart guy, right? I mean, he is the guy who's behind all that stuff. I mean, and it's just brilliant. He's got a doctorate and all that kind of stuff, and he was surprisingly honest in that interview. He never gives interviews, and for whatever reason, we were able to get to him and talk to him, and he was very honest in saying, we reached a point with our machine translation in the languages that we have had for a while, including Russian, of course, or including, German and French and, all these other languages that have been around for a number of years now at Google, that we will see some improvement, but the improvement will not be radical anymore. Because of the amount of data they have already processed to get to the point they're at right now, the improvement will not be dramatic anymore. But I'm glad you're mentioning this, because it's when you look at, and that was part of my point, is when you look at publications about machine translation and what role they're going to play in the industry, languages are never mentioned. It's always talking about machine translation as if it's something that is out there in the middle of nowhere. Of course, it's not in the middle of nowhere. It's in German and in Russian and in Spanish and in Greek and in that's where it is, right? And you need to look at what the different results are, and the results are vastly different, and that's really important in the way we need to discuss that, I think.
Hi, Jost. Well, you mentioned in your presentation that the translation industry is very much fragmented. Do you think that each fragment needs their own standards? Because, for example, the European translation industry standard EN 15038 embraces both translation companies and freelancers. And ISO 17100, that's being developed by ISO Technical Committee 37, follows the same logic, strangely in my opinion, and they also apply this standard, aim this standard at both freelancers and companies. Do you think that's right? Thank you.
Well, I think in some way it is right, because while the industry is fragmented, the LSPs wouldn't be able to work without the freelancers, right? I mean, there is a deep connection between the LSPs and the freelancers. In some ways, I think it's justified that there's standards that cover both. But I do think that that we do need to address at some point the fact that I think one of you, wasn't it even you, Barry? Somebody tweeted yesterday a quote from this conference that the industry is not just fragmented; it's pulverized. Was that somebody? Okay, and that's, I think that's really clever. I mean, it's clever. It is clever. Right? That's true, I think. Of course, it's clever. It's from Renato. What cannot be clever?
But I have a question related to this.
Okay, go ahead.
So, how do you reconcile? Yeah, it's about standards. It's the same question. I want to help him. He'll give the answer now. How do you reconcile a standard like EN 15038 that describes how translations were done in 1957 with machine translation?
Should I try to answer both questions now? Is that what I should do? Well, you know, I'm not enough of an expert. I'm an expert in software standards, so I'm very familiar with the exchange standards in translation. I'm familiar also with the quality standards or the process standards you're talking about, but not enough to really give a qualified answer, I think. But I think it's something that we might need to look at some point. Of course, there is an assumption that when there is a standard that covers both LSPs and translators, that there is that connection that I mentioned. And for many, that's true. I mean, I know that many of you who are freelance translators are working for LSPs, but there is a large number for whom it is not true, for instance, right? And I think that number will increase and will dramatically increase with and something that will increase because of the way that technology will enable that to be more possible, and so that might be a point when we might need to look at that. And as far as the standards not addressing new technology, I think that's very true. I mean, I think that's but how standard committees work, right? I mean, they take decades literally to get standards together, and there might be something in 30 years from now about that takes modern processes into account, which of course at that point are going to be completely outdated. So, any other
Thank you, Jost.